Okay, this is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Thanks for listening today. If you've been following along for the last few weeks, you might have noticed I got myself into a considerable bit more trouble. And I bet there are some of you who are wondering, why did I write that blog? Well, believe me, I've been asking myself that question a lot. And the reason is that on some level, I kind of lost it. I couldn't take it. I really had a plan to put out that statement and just let it ride, let people say whatever they were going to say about me, even if it wasn't true, because I wanted to center around the victim. And that is what my plan was. And then after I put out that statement and I went and looked at the conversation happening in the court of public opinion, first of all, it seemed often much more about me than Mark or Christy even. And after about the 20th time reading someone who didn't know me at all and had only read that original article, asserting with certainty that he knew and he didn't say anything, I lost it. I couldn't take it. I felt like if my story's being told in the court of public opinion, I'm not letting anyone else write it. I will write my own story. And that's what I did. And I have to admit, I wrote it and I published it, and there wasn't a lot of time in between there. It was somewhat impulsive. It was a blogger streak in me from the old times. I got my back up and said, I'm not going to let people smear me without defending myself. And in so doing, I made it about me. And there was no way to tell my story without also revealing inconsistencies that undermined her. So I made it about me, and in so doing undermined her, which directly went against my stated intent to support her. So I was supposed to support her, and then I undermined her. Why would I do that? Because I couldn't take it. I felt like I was presented with a completely false choice of I'm an enabler or I'm a shamer. And that's it. I can't be somebody who is actually for justice for women. I can't be a feminist. I'm either an enabler or a shamer, and that's it. And I have to accept one of those two options. And everything in me rebels against that false choice. Because you know what? I'm all of those things. I'm an enabler, I'm a shamer, and I'm a feminist. I'm all of those things at the same time. And I'm betting you are too. Now, I can't undo what I've already done. I have made a few edits to it because I thought that was warranted. And I am working on an introduction that I'm going to put there to try to mitigate the damage that it created. And the greatest tragedy of it all is that we're not focused on Mark. He's the fucking problem. He's the one who created this harm, if you ask me. I'm putting the blame more squarely on him. Because I think yoga teachers need to be the ones to set those boundaries. And I don't know, I don't have, as I wrote, any direct knowledge beyond what I wrote about. But I know enough to know that harm was created. And he hasn't taken any responsibility for that. And if you're a yoga teacher and you cause harm and you can't take responsibility for that, you have no business being a yoga teacher. So that's why I've been so passionate about these conversations about power abuse, because I do believe that Christy was abused. I think it's abuse. I think it's abusive when men take advantage of women in that manner. Or worse. And that's why I'm so passionate about these conversations and asking the questions that I do. Because I think yoga teachers should hold themselves to high standards so that they can honor the power and tradition of yoga. Now, there may be a silver lining to this shitty-ass situation, which is that I'm betting a lot of people have been thinking about this and talking about this. I know I have. I know I've been delving into myself and these issues of power abuse in ways that are changing me. And I gotta hope that there are other people out there who've been listening to all this and watching all this and also having conversations in their own circles. And hopefully it would lead to similar growth for other people as well. I think that is what yoga is about. Using tools of practice to figure out who we are and how we want to be in the world and represent humanity in ways that we feel are right and true. So I do have plans to bring some people on the show, some trained professionals as well as people whose viewpoints I think are different than mine, to have more conversations around my own particular situation as well as the implications on the larger yoga world and whatnot. If you've got suggestions about people you would like to hear me speak with, do reach out and let me know. I will continue to share with you my ongoing process. And hopefully, as I said, we will all learn in that together. And we have a perfect opportunity to do that today, listening to this conversation that I had with Tatjana Mesar. And I might have just mispronounced your last name, Tatjana, and I am sorry for that, but I never heard you actually say it. But Tatjana is the owner of Zen Yoga Berlin, and I was just there. And I have to say, I am so grateful for Tatjana, because all this stuff that's been going on with me was like happening in a major way while I was staying with her. And she was such a stabilizing presence. Her center is impeccable. And we really connected. I felt like she was like an angel of sorts. She really was a wonderful person, and I really enjoyed the time we had, and I feel like we captured a wonderful conversation about not only her interesting background and perspective, but on a lot of the things that we've talked about on this show in terms of making your way with integrity in the midst of the commodification and standardization and all that stuff. And it was just very reaffirming to come in contact with a like mind in a way that communicates how much there are universalities across all cultures. In any case, I'm very excited for you to hear it today. Before we do, let me say a quick something about today's sponsor, KarmaSoft. I just got an email yesterday from someone saying that they really wanted to get off Mind, Body, Online, and do I still recommend KarmaSoft? And the answer is yes. I've been singing the praises of KarmaSoft since long before they were a sponsor of this show. It's the software that I used to manage my studio back when I had a place in Brooklyn. And I always found it to be far superior. I think it's easier to use, and it's more geared towards, I think, maybe independent centers that aren't trying to like expand and grow and have massive locations, but just need like a solid platform to do their scheduling and accounting and payroll and all that stuff. Just what you need without all the bells and whistles. And the owner, Rudy Cynical, and his team, they know how to treat yoga center owners, I think. Rudy's been on the show before. You could go back and listen. We talked all about him and the company and how he does his business, which I really respect. So do yourself the favor. Make the switch. Check out KarmaSoft. Go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, I've got some upcoming dates on my Gentle is the New Advanced Easing the Pain tour. I'm going to be in Las Cruces, New Mexico, February 8th and 9th. I'm going to be in Sarasota, Florida, March 21st and 22nd. I'm going to be in Austin, Texas, April 11th and 12th. You can find out more about the tour, find out about more dates, and register at jbrownyoga.com/tour. That's jbrownyoga.com/tour. Okay, I think that is going to be it for now. I will touch base with you on the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Tatjana Mesar. Oh, I hit the record button. Oh.
No, you're making me even more nervous.
No, I'm teasing. It's going to be easy, Tatjana. We've been hanging out for days.
We've been talking for days.
We've if we were recording, we would have had like 6 podcasts easily.
I bet your listeners would love listening to 6 podcasts of us talking.
I'm sorry, those conversations were very full.
Okay.
And I mean, actually, I think the listeners would have loved to listen to those conversations in all seriousness. And you know what I think? And I'm about to say something very cheesy that I wouldn't normally say, but I really believe like the forces of the universe brought us together. I mean, it sounds so crazy, but there's so many convergences. It's like getting to sort of be here and observe you in your life and your center, and then all the conversations that we've been having. It's kind of uncanny. It feels like it's not a coincidence, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to also sound cheesy, but there are things called karmic winds that blow us together.
Karmic winds blew us together. And you know what I wanted to first say to you is I noticed something about Zen Yoga Berlin that I have not noticed at any other yoga center I've ever been to.
Really?
And I've been to a lot of yoga centers. Especially in the last few years, big ones, small ones, all different yoga centers.
We don't sell yoga pants?
No, I've seen that before. There's plenty of yoga centers out here who take that stand.
Okay.
But what I noticed is that there is not a single mirror anywhere in Zen Yoga Berlin, not even in the bathrooms.
Oh, okay.
Or not in the hallway, not in the bathrooms. Did you do that on purpose, or did it just happen that way?
It happened that way, or, Aikido people also whom I share the space with don't care about mirrors, and the way I practiced in Croatia, we didn't have any mirrors. It's just like... I
mean, it was so funny because, I just was wearing a hat, and I had a hat head, and I was going to, try to fix my hair. There was no mirrors anywhere, and then I kind of liked that. I was like, oh, I wonder, is that a Zen thing or something? Or just it seems like it's maybe an accident, although you do share space with an Aikido dojo. So there is kind of maybe something there.
But there's a story about mirrors from my retreat center in Croatia. My Sangha in Croatia built this beautiful retreat center, and there was not one mirror in the whole place, and we spent 7 days on a meditation retreat. So for 7 days you don't see any reflection of yourself. And in the beginning it's really strange because you start realizing how often you actually look for the reflection. And after the retreat ended, then one of the old hands in the community said, yeah, when there's no mirror, then you start seeing yourself in everything else, like everything reflects you.
Well, I'm going to make an admission. You see, on the first day, I used my fucking selfie phone.
You did the selfie.
But on the second day, I felt so stupid about it, I didn't do it. I took it as like a thing. I was like, I felt lame about it. I did it to like fix my hair on the first day because it's like I was meeting everybody and I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted my hair to look good or something. But then the next day, I realized I was like, I don't know. I thought if she did this on purpose, I want to, like you just said, not have the image of myself. So I did. So I don't know. That's kind of amazing. I didn't know that. I mean, again, it doesn't seem like you planned that.
But it wasn't also something that I would notice as missing.
Yes, that's right. That's right. No, and nobody's come up. We need a mirror to like fix our makeup or anything like that.
No.
Well, see, that also just goes to what it seems to me your center is like, and it was definitely, watching you like dust mop the floor after each one of my sessions. I was like flashing back, and not just like single-handedly running the show, basically, but also in the way that you're sort of positioned. Like there's a lot of yoga centers in Berlin, I gather. I get a sense.
There's 200, I think, or something like that.
Wow, see, because I can tell, like, Berlin doesn't feel that different from New York. It's just like a little more chill or something. It's more civilized. But you are positioned in like a little niche kind of way for like depth. Like people, you're setting a kind of high bar, and it's not for people who just want to work out. And that's pretty obvious.
Yeah. And, I had a lot of doubts when I arrived to Berlin, like, I'm so different than what I've seen as a scene here. And I wanted also to fit at the beginning. And then I realized, I better stop trying. I just be who I am and what I know to do the best. And it's not that I didn't adapt it, because I bought yoga mats and we have all the props in the studio, which I didn't have when I started to practice with the news props. So, yeah, but I'm glad you noticed that. I hope this is what we are as a studio in Berlin.
And how long ago did you come to Berlin?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. And even before that, the other day, last night we were sitting here on the couch chatting away, and you started to mention yoga classes in Croatia in your early years, and I was like, "Whoa! Don't say anymore. Wait a second. Don't say anymore. I don't want to have to make it unfresh tomorrow." So that kind of is crazy to me, because we do feel like we have like such a parallel thing, and even just like you took my workshop and our like philosophical viewpoints about yoga and stuff. But like I'm like some kid from the suburbs of Los Angeles, and you're from Croatia. See, those things feel like they couldn't be farther apart from one another. So, what was the yoga scene like in Croatia? What year are we talking? How old were you?
I started 2000. I was 25.
In Croatia in 2000?
In Croatia, I started to actually practice with a group. And when I was a kid, when I was 16.
You were 16?
No, I was 25 and I started to practice. But already with 16, 17, I was like, I want to practice yoga, but there was nowhere to go and practice. So I started by reading books.
Oh. Which books? Do you remember which
first one was Shivananda yoga book.
And like the illustrated book?
Illustrated book that had also introduction to pranayama and meditation and asanas. Yeah. And I couldn't do any of the asanas because I was a bookworm and totally not like fit. I hated sports. I wanted to practice more for kind of the philosophical aspect. So I read the book and closed it and like, oh no, this is not for me. But then when I came to study in Zagreb, I joined Transcendental Meditation Group, and they had some... That was my first exposure to asanas.
And asana in TM? Wasn't you mostly sitting?
Yeah, they had asanas, at least in Croatia. There was asana practice and meditation, the mantra. And so I did that for a year, but then I started to feel totally off from the rest of my generation in society. And I also started, in my perspective then, like the people who did it for a longer time looked really strange to me. Like I didn't want to be like them when I grew up.
Isn't that funny? They didn't, like I don't want to end up where they are.
Yeah, like no. So that I stopped, and being like in my 18, 19-year-old, I switched to like, okay, I'm just going to party for a few years.
I'll go from TM to rocking out and going to clubs.
Lifestyle, waking up at 6, like, oh no, forget about it.
And what were the clubs like in Croatia? Are we talking techno? We're talking house?
Yeah, there was techno. Yeah, there was techno, house and techno. we have beautiful beaches, so if you knew the crowd, you would end up on a secret party on a beautiful spot that no one else knows about, because the point is to not be where the tourists are.
Right.
So, and then also just going out and doing house parties at my place. It wasn't a particular, it was pretty dark times when I was growing up in Croatia. We had war going on, so that was the aspect also that made us as kids party hard. Because,
I bet really hard.
Yes, but this is a yoga podcast.
Yes.
We won't go into that direction.
It's not just any yoga podcast.
Okay.
No, but we don't have to talk about your early delinquent days. But I think that's interesting, though, because it's like a counterculture thing. Rave scenes and whatnot. They're like...
Yeah, I studied classical music, so I kind of covered all the bases. There was this elitistic approach to music, and then the party aspect.
That's right. You told me you are a flautist?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And you trained quite a bit. That was like your whole life.
Yeah.
So you were like doing the good girl flautist thing during the day and then raving at night?
Exactly.
And that makes sense why you ended up in like the downtown music scene with those guys in the East Village, because they are like cutting edge.
Yeah.
So you had like tight structure because I've often said, I often say this thing, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, and I talk about this with yoga in terms of technique, that like you could learn to play scales really proficiently and be like eloquent at playing scales and be a very uninspired musician. And then somebody else who doesn't study music theory can actually pick up an instrument and play something totally brilliant. Not to knock musical theory or knowing your language, but that there's something about it that isn't just the ability to have technique.
Exactly, I agree. But in classical music world, without technique, you don't have a tool for expression. So you have to get your technique on a like high level in order to play freely.
Yes.
And you cannot skip it. So I think this is what I got from my musical background and brought also into what I do as a yoga teacher. Yeah. But being in New York then and hanging out in the downtown music scene taught me also to improvise. And
those guys were out.
Yeah.
Those guys were fun. Zorn and all those guys, Rebo. We talked about it. It was so much fun. Those Knitting Factory days.
Yeah,
it's crazy. Like we did a little thing. Like our, you know what I'm saying? Our parallel paths did that weird. Whoa! Right, we missed each other. We probably were in the same room at some point.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. So this aspect of sharpen your technique, have a cutting edge technique and knowledge and interest, and then bring it into playfulness and improvisation. I think this is what I applied also to building my thing here in Berlin, because it's not a standard. I didn't grow up, I didn't emerge out of a yoga studio, out of a certain community here. I just came here and started to teach in my living room, in which we are now.
Well, also, you didn't just not emerge as a yoga teacher. You emerged from like living through war in Croatia. So because I had such a cushy, suburban, like glossy Los Angeles childhood, I can only imagine what it's like growing up with the background of war behind you.
Yeah. I mean, I was a teenager who loved, for instance, in the worst times of war, there was a Twin Peaks show on TV. So,
Yes.
we would watch Twin Peaks, and then there was like general alarm, and then you have to run into the basement. So, Twin Peaks was kind of like relaxing thing to do.
Oh my God. That was the calming thing, Twin Peaks?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's not like we were in some other universe. It was the same universe that you were in, except that there was this aspect of like, bombs falling.
Yeah. All right. So when do you you start with TM, now you're like raving. How does yoga come back?
And then I go to London to rave even more.
So you leave Croatia.
I leave Croatia because also of some things that happened, like I lost my job because of some politically not correct things. Anyway, that's a long story.
You got yourself in trouble by saying some things you weren't supposed to say?
Yeah, more my dad. My dad. And then the whole family suffered. So I decided, you know what, I'm just leaving this country. I had my bachelor degree done, and I went to London. I couldn't work or go to school in London because Croatia wasn't part of European Union back then, so everything was like 10 times more expensive. But I could do like work black jobs in coffee bars and just enjoy the scene there. And I did. And after 1 year, I had enough of that because I saw that there was no entrance into like real life. I could live like this, going to squat parties and just having fun. But, I had also that side
Didn't feel like a long-term plan.
It wasn't a long-term plan.
The squat parties didn't feel like a long-term life plan.
I'm glad I experienced it. Definitely,
I did. There was a time in the East Village where there were squats. I remember them on East 6th Street.
And you explore these alternative types of organization of society and this and that. And then,
I remember they were tapping into the power from under the streets.
Yeah.
They were stealing in the cable, you know, it was crazy. It was
you have to call the number to find out where the party is.
Yes. I remember that. Wow. I remember I left to go to New York in 1990. And even in the 6 months I was away, all my friends from high school had gotten into raving. And when I came back for Christmas, that first Christmas, they took me to this rave. And it was like what you were saying. It's like you had to call the day of, and then you had to drive to this weird location to get to get where the address was. Yeah. And then you would go, and it was this huge warehouse, thousands of people with the techno. We all took ecstasy and. The smart drinks were there, and but it was really there
was something happening. Yeah.
I remember thinking, my friends were doing it a lot. They were going from rave to after party, for the whole weekend and shit. And I was like, this is not. I mean, this is interesting. This is a crazy, weird thing that's going on. It's a subculture thing, and I felt like it was kind of. You could feel, and that's where a lot of internet stuff came out of that. If you listen to Rushkoff and stuff, but in any case. I felt like what you were saying. I was like, I mean, this is one experience that I think is wild and amazing, but I'm not doing this every weekend. Yeah. And it doesn't feel like a long-term plan.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the experiences, especially after, growing up in Croatia. That's a small country. Everyone is white. Everyone is hetero, supposedly. Yeah. Everyone is, Croatian, supposedly. And then I came to London and yes, I can breathe here. First time I went to a big club in London, one person, 26-year-old guy died from heart attack, from taking ecstasy. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to take that anymore. It's dangerous. So that was kind
of right quick.
Yeah. That kept me I was a nerd going to parties and not doing the things that other people were doing.
I didn't go all the way like my friends did.
Yeah.
I was really interested in a creative process, and I was studying acting and stuff. So you're in London, and then how do you get? I still haven't gotten back to yoga with you.
And then I came back to Croatia after a year there, and I had to kind of connect, the dots and what am I going to do? So I started to work in a music school, and that's where I also started to practice yoga because I was really confused about everything. I had tons of questions about life, about growing up during the war times. And for me, yoga was always, the way I found it, or it came to me, was yoga and meditation. It was never a separate thing. It was practiced in the Buddhist tradition. And the healing process started. It was first the body pain that I also had as a flute player, the left shoulder in pain and the posture, but also the confusion of being a 24-year-old and trying to figure things out. Yeah. And also after being in London, it was so boring to be in a small town in Croatia that allowed me to really start practicing, to do my master degree. There was nothing else that would distract me.
No raves? No. All right, so what does a yoga class in Croatia look like in 2000 or 2001?
Back then, there were people would usually offer classes in schools. So after the school hours finished, then you get into the gym, and you clean up and you do your yoga practice, or in the kindergarten, stuff like that. There was no yoga studios. And then there was a big army building that was abandoned after the war, empty and kind of falling apart, and it got squatted first by punks in Pula, where I lived, in a town where I lived, and then everyone else started to come, and including the yoga people. So we had one room in that squatted army building, and this is where I practiced for 8 years. together with the sounds of punk bands.
See, that's what I was just going to say. Like, to me, actually, for myself, because, you know, I was kind of like a bit of a punk rocky player at one point. Punk rock and yoga do go together for me. Like, punks and yogis, they're pushing the edges of whatever, the cultures and societies.
It can be countercultural thing to do, or a tool to position yourself against the stream.
And the point I'm trying to make is that's what it was when I got to it. Like, the reason I got into yoga, because it was like a healthier thing than being a punk. But it was as equally kind of radical and like counterculture.
Yeah, and the whole generation of teachers that I had in Croatia, I think they had the same spirit back in the 70s when they started. In the midst, in a socialist times, they started to practice something that had to do with spirituality, and they traveled to England to study with their teacher. They were all practicing martial art, Kempo, and yoga and Buddhism. So it was really like...
Do you remember the names of these teachers?
So my teacher, his name is Žarko Andričević. He's now Dharma master of Chan master. And then Carmen Mihalinec, another teacher, then Ella Vukelja. There's a lot of people I could mention.
I know, but it's like
now.
Those are names like you would never hear. I haven't heard. Unless you're from Croatia, right?
Žarko is actually teaching regularly upstate New York in Dharma Drum Mountain, and also in Vancouver and internationally now. So those early beginnings in the 70s, he's a well-known teacher, Buddhist teacher today.
So, but he's a Buddhist teacher, but you learned yoga from him?
Yes, because it's Zen yoga. It's a Buddhist yoga, and he's also a founder of Zen yoga in Croatia, together with the whole generation of people around him. It's not just him; it's the team or the sangha.
Okay, so what were the classes like?
So. Quite different. First of all, we all wear the similar, like not kimono, but like you go to
like
karate.
A dojo, like a
dojo
gi or
style.
whatever.
Exactly. You would bow at the beginning when you enter the dojo, counting in Japanese to get the rhythm of the class, and there was a lot of partner exercises, so partner work, massage, a little bit also like Aikido. There was communication between people. We didn't have mats. And there was no music. First time I heard music in yoga classes was when I came to New York.
That makes sense, because that's kind of when that playlist thing started.
Yeah, and I was so confused. I didn't know, where is my attention supposed to be, on the music or on what's going on inside? I was like, wow, how do you do this?
Isn't that interesting, especially if you're a musician or something? That is actually why I stopped doing that. I used to DJ at my classes and have playlists and stuff. And I love music, like I love Radiohead, but it is a distraction for me to be rocking out to Radiohead while trying to do my breathing and moving practice.
For me, it's like listening music while you're listening music. It's
But I also think that, like, I use music now because sometimes people, it's actually kind of confrontational, the silence, depending on who I'm working with, and like a little bit of bansuri flutes, which is amazing to me that you play. Oh my gosh. But like, I think some types of music can set a little bit of a background that actually puts people a little bit more at ease. Maybe not you, but I've noticed that sometimes when I use no music at all, it's like people are more uncomfortable.
I agree. If you find a music that's not confrontational for people,
if it doesn't get in the way, hopefully it doesn't get in the way.
Tastes differ, and what someone likes, someone else doesn't like.
I know, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
All right,
Impose your taste.
But in the early days in Croatia, no freaking music.
No music, and meditation at the end of the class, and also partner work, partner games, so communication between people. So there was also an aspect of community. I created friendships that lasted for life. I'm still friends with those people, and we would go once a year on a yoga retreat in South Croatia, and that was special times, because I don't know how much you know about Croatia. One thing that's for certain is that it's dramatically beautiful on the coast, and to have
like
a yoga,
the majestic natural wonder.
It's beautiful, and we would have a yoga retreat right there on the coast at the end of the season, and all the elements are so coming forth: the water, the air, the earth. So you practice, and the nature actually does half of the practice for you.
I would totally agree. Having moved from the city now, and like I can walk and be in the forest, it's a thing. It's a thing to be around nature in that more untouched way.
Yeah. And also it's a famous wine region in Croatia. So,
hey. Who would have thought? I didn't know there was a wine, like vineyards in Croatia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Huh. All right. So the other thing I got from you when you were telling me about your earlier times in Croatia was that a little bit more like I had, but maybe even more so for you, like it was much more about education. Like it wasn't just take classes.
No, definitely.
And then do teacher training. It's like coming to class was training.
Partly, we had these seminars where you would go more in depth and had Dharma talks, and then there was a library so you could read, and there was yoga classes, and then there was, and if you want to learn more, this is what you can do. So there was a context of the yoga classes that belonged to a wider picture. Many of my teachers were educated in Sanskrit because there was a high level of scholarship of Sanskrit in Croatia.
You said you were talking about a relationship between Croatia and India the other day.
Yeah.
What was that? Can you say that again?
Well, politically, ex-Yugoslavia was connected with India through this non-aligned movement that no one knows about in the West, but it was important kind of grouping of third world countries who had oil to position themselves between East and West. And Tito, who was president of Yugoslavia, was a very smart diplomat in that sense, and he connected with India and Egypt. And that's why there was this diplomatic connections. And for instance, in our Buddhist center in Zagreb, we had an altar that was on a beautiful wooden box that Indira Gandhi sent a bunch of tea to Croatian diplomat. So, these connections then brought also exchange, academic exchange. And Sanskrit was really an option to study, like you study philosophy and Sanskrit studies.
Wow. See, I wouldn't have known there was an India-Croatia connection.
Yeah.
So your teachers were coming from kind of like a more academic
place. My teacher, Carmen Mihalinec, who taught history and philosophy of yoga, she has a degree in Sanskrit, and I think she's now finished also her PhD in Buddhist studies, and is also a yoga practitioner.
So again, because when I was doing which I do now in these these intensive where I get to have a cohesive group, I'm trying to go a little more in depth in these ideas about history and philosophy. You were there. And very rarely is there somebody else in the room who's done you said in my training, you were the only one who had, when I asked the questions. So I'm intrigued by that. Was that something that happened in a more formal training you did with your teachers, or?
Yeah, I got in the teacher training, we got a lot of information. And
so there was a formal teacher training that you eventually did with them?
Yeah, it was 2 years, 660 hours plus all the requirements. It was very comprehensive.
Was there
training.
A Croatia organization for yoga teachers that was establishing this standard?
Yeah, well actually they wanted to have a validation like everyone else through Yoga Alliance, so they got 500 hours certified. So my training I didn't have an option of 200 hours. I had to do 500 hours from the start. And they said, this is not enough, but okay, this is the option we'll go with.
Certificates are a big deal in Europe, I found. When I was in Vienna, it was the same thing. Everybody's it was all about the certificates.
It's a way to validate, even though I know you after you finish the training, you have a different picture of that validation.
Yes. All right, but it does sound like your training was pretty in-depth.
Yes, yeah. And this is, for instance, when I came to New York, I was fascinated with New York yoga scene. I felt, I'm coming from this small country and kind of I did one thing and then I came to New York and everyone looked to me so self-assured, everyone knew what they're talking about. And at the beginning I thought I felt provincial and I wanted to learn everything. And then after some time I realized, well, actually...
No, sometimes they were more talk than walk, weren't they?
I learned from people, from teachers that are good teachers in New York, but this is my process of actually what I got in Croatia is really valid and not so often. It's not that everyone gets that.
It's true, especially, I don't know when you got to New York, what year it was then.
2008.
Yeah, see, by 2008 already, things had shifted. I opened my place in 2007, so by the time I opened up a place, those earlier times when yoga classes were more like education, those were kind of past. Now they were really just classes, and they were already starting to get shorter, and frankly, there were so many more 200-hour trained teachers who didn't have a training that took them in depth back to the Vedas and before Patanjali, or had like real discussions about what those things might mean or what the implications are. It was more like memorize yamas and write them on the test. So that kind of like training where you just check a couple of boxes, but you can really do the forms good. Which is sort of where I started. I originally could just do the poses really good, maybe with more precision than other people in the room. And that's what qualified me to be a teacher.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.